Hi everyone, welcome back to Lifting the Lamp. I'm Frater Eleftheria, and as you've probably noticed from the very different setup that I have here tonight, tonight's video is very special. Many of you have been following my spiritual journey on this channel for quite some time now, and I've spoken about many of the milestones on my spiritual journey over the years. And this year I reached another important milestone, which I'm going to talk about tonight. And that is that I have crossed the abyss. And tonight's video is going to be about explaining the process that I went through, and really it's going to be a couple of videos, I think, because there's a lot of material to cover in the experience that I went through. I initiated the process of crossing the abyss around Halloween of last year, and it's taken several months to actually complete the process, and there's been a lot of spiritual lessons along the way and a lot to delve into. So I'm going to space this over 2 videos, but both will be very intriguing in their own right. The first in this series is going to be all about the ritual that I did, the visionary experiences that I had, and the rich symbolism of those visions, and really walking you through that. And then the second video is where things get more intense, and they get quite dark, to be honest, because this is the outcome of the ritual to cross the abyss, unfolding over the subsequent months, and the hard spiritual lessons that I had to learn. So lots of knowledge in there for you to benefit from, but very intense. So I'll ease you into it tonight with the more easy aspects of this initiation, of this ordeal. And I wanted to wear my hoodie. This particular hoodie forms a black pyramid when you put the hood up, which I thought was appropriate given the subject matter. But it is quite hot because I'm surrounded by candles, and it's a November night in Australia, and I'm wearing a hoodie. So I've had my little bit of theatrics now. Like my previous videos on knowledge and conversation with the Holy Guardian Angel, I feel that this is a aspect of the Western esoteric tradition which there isn't a lot of information available on, and so I wanted to have the experience, and I wanted to bring some of that first-hand knowledge back to build on that, and to ultimately help people and help bridge the gulf between the abyss and humanity. So that's what I'm here to do. And this week and the following week, I'm going to tell you all about my seasons in the abyss. And if you understood that reference, you are awesome. Anyway, without further ado, I'll get started on my account of crossing the abyss. So first, some much needed background. What exactly is the crossing of the abyss? If you've just come here and you don't know anything about the crossing of the abyss, here's the rundown. In the Western esoteric tradition, there is a way that people can put themselves through initiations in order to gradually spiritually develop themselves, according to the model of the tree of life of the Kabbalah, moving up the different levels of the tree of life to get closer to God. And each of these levels represents an initiation. And this is particularly the model in secret societies such as the Golden Dawn and the AA, the Argenteum Astrum. And the objective is to leave our ordinary human life and return to God. Every level is an initiation, and the 2 most important initiations are knowledge and conversation with the Holy Guardian Angel and the crossing of the abyss. And knowledge and conversation with the Holy Guardian Angel is like the preparation for the later important initiation of crossing the abyss. I'm not going to go into knowledge and conversation in this video, but I've done some other videos on this channel that you can check out if you want more information on that. As for the crossing of the abyss, well, this is the level of initiation where On the Tree of Life, we have moved through the initiations of the first 7 Sephirot of the Tree of Life, the first 7 levels of initiation, and between the first 7 and the last 3, representing the supernal triad, representing the highest levels of God, there is an unbridgeable gulf, an abyss, which separates them. And in order to cross the abyss into the 3 higher levels of the Tree of Life, you need to undergo a radical change in your perception of reality. The extent to which we are mortal beings that will perish, which is based upon the fact that we identify with our separate nature, which will be dissolved and dispersed one day. And it's about releasing ourselves from that limited, mortal, egoic personality in order to be able to comprehend and reach those levels of consciousness represented by the supernal triad. And so the actual initiatory process where we cross the abyss takes the form of a visionary experience. Sometimes it can be done through meditation. We reach an altered state of consciousness, and it shocks our consciousness into being outside the limited personality. This experience is often perceived in the spirit vision as going into a great abyss and fighting with the demon Corazon, the demon of dissolution and dispersion, and having our self destroyed, having our sense of self, our personality utterly annihilated in this abyss. And this visionary experience, or this shift in consciousness, is accompanied by, quite often, by things happening in our life, which are synchronicities, what Jungian psychologists would call a long, dark night of the soul, a crisis of meaning, some other crisis, circumstances which force us to confront the fact that our old life is over and we have to step into a completely different reality in order to get to the other side of that, which is the reality beyond the ego, the reality beyond the abyss. So that, in a nutshell, is what the crossing of the abyss is. And this is what I was attempting. Now, this is not something to be undertaken lightly, this initiation, this ordeal of the abyss. It's a very advanced initiation, and you would have to have at least a decade, maybe more, of experience working with magic, working with mysticism, before you even attempted something like this. You would have to have had knowledge and conversation with the Holy Guardian Angel. There's a whole lot of preparation that you would have to do before even attempting this. And to try and attempt to do this prematurely could lead to disaster for the person who isn't ready for it. I did attain knowledge and conversation with the Holy Guardian Angel in 2013, but I've waited 11 years to do this crossing of the abyss working, because I needed to be sure that I was ready before I attempted it. And this was something that was especially at the forefront of my mind, because in my previous incarnation, I also worked this system of initiation, and I did make an attempt to cross the abyss, but I made the attempt way, way too early. And so things kind of went sideways in my magical life after that, and I had to come back. So this time around, I had to be super, super sure that I was ready before I attempted the crossing. And things have been set up in my life to allow that attempt to happen again. I even happen to have a physical body which looks very similar to the one that I had in my previous incarnation. So there's a lot of recurrences, and one of those is the ordeal of the abyss. So I had to get it right this time, and I hope that I have. I feel that I have. Well, I haven't gone insane. I mean, I believe that I can speak with extra-dimensional beings telepathically, and that there's probably people from at least one intelligence community of a government monitoring me because they know I can do that. But I swear I'm not crazy. But anyway, that hasn't happened, and I'm still here. So I'd say that that's a success so far. So the kind of preparation that I did before crossing the abyss, obviously all of the work in the curriculum of the AA, that is to do with the Adeptus grades, I made sure that I had completed all of those tasks first. In addition to that, I was working with another Western esoteric system, which is a form of modern Gnosticism, which borrows a lot from the fourth way of school of G.I. Gurdjieff, which is very focused on the dissolution of the ego. So very much the same goal as crossing the abyss, but a lot more piecemeal. We separate the ego into many I's or egos, each representing a negative habit or a sin or whatever, and we work on each I one by one to eliminate it. And so I'd been doing this for a number of years before I attempted crossing the abyss. And so it was kind of like a softer descent into the abyss because I'd already begun the work of dissolving the ego. I think that was probably a good thing. Some of the initiations that I put myself through in that system had to do with entering the abysses of different planets. So kind of like a mini crossing of the abyss for each planet. And when I got up to the abyss of Saturn, of Binah, to me, that was the logical point to treat it as though I was now entering the abyss as that is understood in the AA system. It's also worth mentioning that I had, as one of the tasks of the AA Adeptus grades, I had read Liber Os Abysmi Vel Dart, which is a reading curriculum preparing one for the crossing of the abyss in an intellectual sense, reading the writings of people such as Hume to break down our sense that there's any sort of reality to the phenomenal world. So I'd gone through that several years beforehand, and I'd given myself a little bit of help to make the crossing by calling upon the angel Metatron. And there's a video that I made more than a year ago now where I called upon the angel Metatron, and there was something that I asked for Metatron in private after I'd finished filming the video that was for public consumption, and that was to help me in crossing the abyss. And I guess Metatron held up his end of the bargain because I managed to do it in the end. So anyway, I'd done all this preparatory work, and then I settled upon the 31st of October 2024 as the date when I was going to do the ritual to initiate the process of crossing the abyss. And there's one very well-known method for doing this. It's the method that Crowley used in his Enochian workings in Algeria, where he opened the 10th ether of Zax, and in the scrying, he entered into the 10th ether of Zax, which is one and the same with the abyss. It's kind of like a visionary journey or a astral journey where you project yourself into the abyss, and then the rest of the ordeal follows on from that. So that's what I did. I opened the 10th ether of Zax on the very, very early hours of the 31st of October 2024. Before I did the scrying to enter the ether, I took the Oath of the Abyss by reading it aloud. And the Oath of the Abyss went like this. I, Frater Eleftheria, a member of the body of God, hereby bind myself on behalf of the whole universe, even as we are now physically bound unto the cross of suffering, that I will lead a pure life as a devoted servant of the order, that I will understand all things, that I will love all things, that I will perform all things and endure all things, that I will continue in the knowledge and conversation of my holy guardian angel, that I will work without attachment, that I will work in truth, that I will rely only upon myself, that I will interpret every phenomenon as a particular dealing of God with my soul. And if I fail herein, may my pyramid be profaned and the eye closed to me. And upon reading this oath, I projected myself into the 10th ether, and I began to have visions. But I also found that I was very drowsy that I felt almost sapped of energy when I entered the abyss. And so I kept being dragged into dreams. And so the visions took the form of dreams that I was having as I was on the verge of falling asleep in this scrying session. And it actually felt like I was being deliberately distracted or drawn away from the central experience of the scrying by being given these random dreams. But the thing that made these dreams so interesting is that there were little Easter eggs within the dream that hinted that there was some other process unfolding. So for example, one of the dreams that I had, I was simply walking through a suburb. It could have been any suburb. Everything seemed to be normal, but then at one point I encountered a dog which had 3 heads. So an obvious symbol of Cerberus, a reminder that I'm actually trapped in the underworld. And then, another scene where I encountered some roses, but the roses were dying. So things like this to remind me of the initiation that I was going through, remind me of the impermanence of all things. And so these little things allowed me to center myself back on the vision, on trying to scry the 10th ether, and defending against Corazon's diversions. And this is very different to the previous vision of the 10th ether that I'd had, because of course when I did the Jebefel ritual, the 10th ether was one of the levels of the heavens that I scried. But on that occasion, it was more like I was doing a tour of the abyss. I wasn't going there and staying there for a time so that it completely changed my constitution. I was just doing a bit of an exploration. And in that vision, I saw the demon Corazon in a number of different forms, and the attacks of the demon were a lot more overt. And what you would expect from such an experience, this was a lot more subtle. There was a lot more finesse and guile that the demon was trying to use to get me off track. Eventually I did see Corazon in the vision. I saw a sword in the vision in my hand, and I thrust it at Corazon. And then the vision changed again, and I was in a great library. And it was like a really arcane kind of library. There were a bunch of rolled up scrolls that were on shelves rather than books. And there was a librarian there, and I asked the librarian in the vision to see my own scroll. And the librarian found my scroll, unfurled it, and then informed me that I had 11 payments of karma left to make. Not sure if that number is symbolic or not, but that's what I was told. And then the vision changed again, and I found myself in an old house with lots of portraits on the wall. Then I heard a voice which said, "People cannot reach the Christ unless they die to themselves." Then the vision changed again, and I saw a white-robed figure, and followed this figure out one of the doors to arrive at the shore of a lake with the very dark waters. And I knew that this was the abyss. The being and I then waded into the waters, and the being baptized me in the waters of the abyss. And so by this point I had been scrying for about an hour and 15 minutes, and it was quite exhausting. And I saw a being in human form, covered head to toe in belts, wrapped in belts like a mummy is wrapped in bandages. And the being told me that the key to winning a war is in whittling away your opponent. And so I interpreted this as meaning I would not finish the visionary process of crossing the abyss that night, that I would have to revisit the abyss another time. Then I came back to ordinary consciousness briefly and looked under the table that I was working from, and I saw visibly in front of me a black scorpion, and then the scorpion vanished. It was like an apparition or a hallucination, I'm not sure. Then I briefly resumed scrying again and found myself in a void of pure darkness. And though it was dark, there was a certain glare about the place, or perhaps an iridescence that was utterly golden in colour. And so I then came back from the scrying session, but I could intuit that some part of me was left behind in the abyss that night. So this is my account, this is my magical journal, covering what happened to me as I initiated this process. And I'll keep sharing with you from this because there's some incredible stuff that happened. So the next day, of course, was the day of the 31st of October when I woke up, and I went about my normal daily business, but I noticed a definite change in me. For one thing, it was as though there was something missing inside of me. Very jarring and uncomfortable experience, although I eventually managed to get used to it. But it was as though there was a lack of connection between my innermost self and the world that I was inhabiting. Nothing seemed completely real. I also noticed that my normal narrative of a sense of self or identity, which I held quite close to me, had vanished. And in its place, there was just a series of experiences and states of consciousness, which I took as they were and did not try to fit into any particular narrative or put in any sort of context that told a story. So later that afternoon or evening, my wife and I went to a Halloween street party, trick-or-treating to parents and kids. It was in a nearby neighborhood, and a lot of synchronicities happened as we were doing this. There was, of course, a lot of really spooky imagery, skeletons and dilapidated houses and tombstones and things like that. And there were a number of signs, like literal signs, that were up around the place, and I paid close attention to what the signs said. They all said things like, enter at your own risk, crossing dangerous, one of my personal favourites, and most interesting of all perhaps, no one may leave. So all very clear synchronicities related to the crossing of the abyss. The last message is quite foreboding, but perhaps the true meaning is that in order to leave the abyss, you have to become no one. So I felt like the working needed more oomph, so I decided to reopen the ether of Zax again and do some further scrying. And so I did that on the 13th of November, today's date, the date of recording. And I found myself in a vision again, obviously, scrying the ether, and I'll detail what I wrote about that vision now. So in the spirit vision, I found myself in a vast post-apocalyptic wasteland. It felt as though weeks and months were passing, and I was going mad from the loneliness and isolation I was experiencing in this environment. Within this vision, I was asked by a voice if I was willing to give up everything to the divine. I said yes, but with some reluctance. The madness and loneliness of the vision then continued. Eventually, in the environment of the vision, I saw a sunset of beautiful pink clouds against a dark blue sky. A voice told me that the key to surviving the ordeal was in finding the beauty of divinity even in the midst of suffering, even within the void. In the vision, I then saw myself thrust into hell, as it's described in Christianity, and in the vision battling with the demon Corazon, until at last I stopped fighting and surrendered to being disintegrated by tendrils of electricity. I then saw myself in a great marble hall before a master who told me that I needed to make efforts to dissolve the ego every day. There was a white curtain behind him. I saw this open and a splendorous light shone out. I saw a young, dark-haired woman before me. She reached into me, like she put her hand through my body like a ghost does in the movies, and then out of my body she removed an infant, a living infant, like a newborn baby, and she took the infant before the light so that it could be in the presence of God's throne, and then she brought the baby back into the marble hall where I was, and the veil was closed. I then saw myself sinking into the abyss in the form of a great dark ocean, and that was the end of the vision. The next day I had feelings of dislocation between my body and my spirit. Again, something was not right at a soul level. Even though my mind and body were completely at peace, there was just something off, something out of place within me. But I still felt like I needed to deepen the experience of the abyss. So on the 19th of November, I reopened the ether of Zax for the third and last time. And here's my account of that night. I felt myself being pulled into the vision very strongly this time. The vision opened and I saw a grim figure who I knew to be the ferryman. He extended a black skeletal hand for payment. I reached into my pocket and produced a single gold coin with an image of Apollo minted on it. I handed this to the ferryman and he let me on his boat. We travelled across a vast expanse of water, which looked like a marshland during the night time. Eventually, the boat went over a precipice, which was like that of a waterfall. But then afterward we continued sailing, but now we were sailing suspended in a void of stars all around. And as we drifted through space, I then saw the stars each being snuffed out one by one, until at last we were enveloped in blackness on all sides. We remained in the blackness for some time. Then in the vision I was walking up a sandstone staircase into a vast gallery or chamber. The architecture was ancient Egyptian. Before me I saw a great scarab carrying a golden orb on its back. I knew this to be Khepra, and therefore I knew that I was in the afterlife. So I was standing before the god Khepra in this hall or this gallery or chamber. And then to my left there was one archway, some distance away from me. And equal distance away from me on the right there was a second archway. The archway on the left was emanating gold light and looked very pleasant. The archway on the right was shrouded in darkness and looked very foreboding. Khepra directed me to the archway on the right, which caused me great concern. As I approached the dark archway, I saw a banner above it which depicted Yaldabaoth, the lion serpent, in black on black. The sort of design was black on black. I moved through the archway and went down another staircase, this time entering into an underground cavern filled with shallow water. Within the water there were crocodiles. I knew that if I was in this place, it meant that my heart was heavier than the feather of Mart, and I was to be devoured by the crocodiles. Accepting my fate, I waded into the water and the crocodiles lunged at me, dragging me under the water and tearing me apart. I mentally received a message as this was happening, that everybody gets devoured by the crocodiles in the afterlife, that every person who is physically incarnate has a soul that is so weighed down by their sins that they cannot enter paradise. But it doesn't end there, fortunately, for then after my body was torn apart, I rose up out of the water, my consciousness that is, rose up out of the water as a small golden speck. In this form I rose upward until the scene changed and I looked up at a great dome like that of the interior of a mosque or a great church. The roof of the dome was adorned with images of wings, each with feathers in every colour of the rainbow. As I rose, I noticed a floating feather which I passed as I continued to rise. Perhaps this was the feather of Mart, which I had been made lighter than at long last. I then saw the wings that formed the dome moving apart, so the dome opened up like a flower, revealing a heavenly sky above. I continued to rise into this heavenly environment. But soon after I entered this heavenly environment, I knew that there was another stage of purification that was needed. I then saw every form dissolve away, and even felt my own form as a speck dissolving away so that all melted into nothing. At this point I noticed a change in my consciousness as well. I found it difficult to focus on anything, almost as though I was in a semi-conscious state. My consciousness seemed to feel as though it was pouring out like ink spills out of an ink pot when it's knocked over. With what little consciousness remained, I registered that I was in a void or abyss of sorts. However, unlike the abyss as I had previously encountered it, this void brought with it feelings of bliss. I knew then that it is only our ego that makes us fear the void, and that crossing the abyss entailed changing our view of the void. I had come to this realization before, however, I had never had to engender this attitude with quite the level of commitment or direct experience as I did in this moment. This abyss also seemed to have an unlimited number of phenomena flashing in and out of existence within it. Each of these seemed as real as the next, but each was also equally a part of the void, enveloped within it. At one point in the visionary experience, I opened my eyes and looked around the room, so I came out of the vision. However, things were different. I now knew that this so-called reality was just another dream or apparition, like the vision that I just had, and all of it was an illusion happening within the abyss. the true reality. All is contained within the abyss. I no longer felt like a person, but rather a dreamer dreaming a dream, or an actor playing a part. I then re-entered the vision for a time, and I saw the rod of Aaron blossoming miraculously. However, the flower blossoming upon the rod was a lily. I knew then that I was being declared dead in the vision. I was then tumbling out of the abyss and back into the universe. However, I could see that I was still connected to the abyss via a cord coming out of my navel. This is what I saw in the vision again. In the abyss, I saw that there remained an embryo floating in the darkness. The cord in my navel was connected to the cord in the navel of this embryo. I then re-entered my physical body and came out of the vision. So, those were my visions of the abyss that I had as a result of scrying the 10th ether as a way of kickstarting my process of crossing the abyss. After I had done this, I had situated my soul inside the abyss, and the magical process of my ego, my personality being broken down could begin. And this was reflected in the way my consciousness started to change, as I've already kind of gone into in this video. But it also happened through a number of situations that came about in my life that pushed me to the absolute edge in so many different ways. And that was really where the hard and difficult lessons began. And these were really the experiences that broke me down in the way that only the ordeal of the abyss really can. But that is a whole other video. I think I've given you enough to digest already, enough to ruminate over in the meantime. Please stay tuned for the second installment of this account of crossing the abyss, where I talk about the challenges that I went through in my life and the lessons that I learned. Very, very powerful and insightful spiritual lessons that came out of that. I think you'll really benefit from watching it. So I will see you at my next video, where I conclude my account of the crossing of the abyss. I hope that you've enjoyed this video. If you did, please leave a like, subscribe to my channel to support my work, hit join or thanks to support me further, and you can buy merch from my merch store, such as this hoodie, if you want to support me that way as well. But thanks again for listening, and I'll see you next time.